A quick announcement, join me on Saturday, February 25th at a virtual event to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of Russia's genocidal reinvasion of Ukraine. I'll be joining the all-civic group, the Media and Democracy Project, for a stream screening of my film, Mr. Jones, and afterwards we'll have a Q&A session. I'll be there live with you on Zoom. We will discuss the film, what role the media plays in defending against disinformation and authoritarianism, and what we can all be doing to support better media. You can sign up for that by going to the website that we'll link to in the show notes for this episode, available as always on the Patreon page for this episode or wherever you get your podcasts. Admission is free, but we do suggest a donation to the wonderful and essential Kyiv Independent, whose journalists are risking their lives to cover the genocide. Thank you so much.
I'm Sarah Kensier, the author of the bestsellers The View from Flyover Country and Hiding in Plain Sight, and of the book They Knew, How a Culture of Conspiracy Keeps America Complacent, out now.
And I'm Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine.
And this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast covering corruption in the United States and rising autocracy around the world. And so just FYI, Andrea and I are both suffering from colds. I'm getting over mine and no longer sound like Joan Rivers. Andrea seems to have a case of NPR voice, but we're going to soldier ahead and try to fill up the allotted time by giving you the big picture of all of the corruption that has occurred in the last time since we chatted. So to kick things off, by the time you hear this episode, Joe Biden will have delivered the State of the Union address. We are going to talk about that on our Patreon bonus, which we're going to tape tomorrow after the speech. So, if you want to listen to our thoughts about that, and also, get your questions answered directly by sending them to us, you can sign up on patreon.com/gaslit. So yeah, you have that to look forward to. Anyway, I was thinking about what Biden is going to say at this historical juncture. And I started thinking back to the Obama administration and when Obama would do the State of the Union. And I used to think to myself, I want to live in that version of America. I want to live in the America that Obama is describing. It sounds so nice and so peaceful and prosperous. And it was genuinely jarring to hear Obama's description of a country so removed from what I and everyone I knew was experiencing in everyday life. And this was not due to Obama specifically on a lot of issues, but a large number of economic and political factors having to do with greed and corruption. Factors that led to an American decline that was not acknowledged in a forthright way by the mainstream media until the 2016 election brought these issues to light in a horrific way. And I had to stop watching Obama give that speech, give the State of the Union, because the disconnect hurt so much. Then, of course, after Obama, we got Trump and his State of the Unions, which sounded like fascist war cries, because they were. And I couldn't watch those either. And so, I'm expecting with Biden, we'll get something, more like the Obama era, but mixed with a defensiveness, not a defense, mind you, of America and the American people, but defensiveness of himself and the broken institutions for which he stands. And I say that with sorrow because I was hoping that things would be better, but the title of today's Gaslit Nation episode is Trump Didn't Win, but the Coup Won. And this, is coming out of a conversation that Andrea and I were having about developments, especially since the Republicans took the House and, what's in store for us in 2023 and onward. We were kind of looking back at this and realizing the only part of Trump's coup that was truly defeated was Trump himself. the damage and infiltration and elite criminal impunity and cruelty live on. And so we're going to give you a few examples of this. I will start. Hopefully, Andrea's voice will return and she can jump in. There's so many examples of this, and we encourage you on Twitter, on our Patreon page, to submit your own. The most obvious one to me, the most obvious example to me of Trump did not win, but the coup won, is that the insurrectionists are in the House and now they are being installed on top committees. People who attempted to overthrow the federal government are now creating the policies of the federal government. People who are national security threats are now dictating national security. And so there is an opportunity to do something about this by simply not seating insurrectionist and seditionist members of Congress, people like Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, a large number of them who announced their plans in advance, who confessed after, who are openly complicit. But Pelosi, Speaker of the House at the time, failed. She refused to do that. She allowed them to remain in their positions and to gain a larger following. And now they have the structural power that they lacked when the Democrats were in charge of the House. And now it is the Republicans. There was and still remains an opportunity to do something about this for the DOJ if they would investigate the January 6th attacks and these open public confessions of sedition from multiple Republican members of Congress. But the DOJ does not care because Merrick Garland's DOJ does not work for the public interest of the United States of America. Merrick Garland's DOJ works for the coup. Do you have any thoughts on that, on our roaming seditionists creating the policies that define our lives?
I was miming throughout your entire readout.
We need an interpretive dance, live action Gaslit Nation.
Yes, this will be a special video episode of me just expressing myself with my hands. And I thought that, it is what it is. Well, just to add to that, there was a troubling editorial by the New York Times. The New York Times got their editorial board together and they called out senior Democrat senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, for allowing Republicans like Kremlin propagandist Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who barely eked by for re-election against openly progressive and openly Black Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin. It was like 1 percentage point or something. We got so close in Wisconsin. But so Ron Johnson, who famously spent 4th of July in Moscow with a group of other traitorous Republicans and just spews Kremlin talking points, he was given as an example in this New York Times editorial on how he was allowed to block a proposed judge by the Biden administration. And there's this really stupid piece of etiquette. It's not even a rule. It's like a Senate Tea Party etiquette where there's a courtesy given to senators that block judges from their home state that have been proposed by the president. So here you had this wonderful, qualified, openly gay judge out of Wisconsin who Biden put forth, and Dick Durbin, who's running the show on getting the judges confirmed in the Senate, let Kremlin Ron Johnson block this judge. And he just was like, oh, shucks, okay. That was Dick Durbin's response. Like, dang it. And how can you allow this to happen when Trump and McConnell packed the courts? The Federalist Society, that's just this extremist white patriarchy, Birch Society type legal warfare against our country, packed the Supreme Court. They overturned Roe versus Wade just like they always wanted, even though we all watched in the confirmation hearings these guys, Amy Coney Barrett, Kavanaugh, others, speaking out of both sides of their mouths in these confirmation hearings, basically lying when it came to Roe v. Wade being settled law and so on. How can you, in this time of McConnell and Trump, ideologue, far right court packing, not push through as many qualified, law abiding, good governance judges as you possibly can? Dick Durbin is acting like a mansion and a cinema when they hold the filibuster to be sacred when it's absolutely not. As we've talked about on the show, we had Adam Gentleson on with his great book, The Kill Switch, talking about how the filibuster is a weapon of white supremacy that was innovated and driven and popularized by white senators from former slaveholding states to try to put the brakes on civil rights for non-white citizens and to turn back some of those laws and just basically stop progress across our country. And it works, it works, it works, it works, and it's working today just as intended. And one of the things it's working against is climate change, slowing down progress, meaningful progress on climate change. Who's going to be most impacted by climate change? Everybody, but especially non-white communities that live in very low-lying areas, in a lot of cities that tend to be on water, and so on and so on. So Dick Durbin is the mansion in cinema when it comes to allowing Biden's judges to be blocked by this really archaic, stupid Tea Party etiquette rule, gesture, piece of etiquette, let's call it that, known as blue slipping, like a blue slip. And the New York Times editorial board was so alarmed by this, they got everyone together and wrote a big old fat editorial from the editorial board of New York Times saying, for the love of God, Dick Durbin, stop it, cut it out. We see what you're doing. They called him out. They called out Dick Durbin. And thank God, because he's someone that's been on my radar as an obstructionist towards ringing the alarm and enacting any meaningful reforms, any meaningful accountability. He's someone that is like a cuddly version of Manchin and Sinema, but he's a Democrat establishment figure who's entrenched in that club, who is pleasing the corporate masters that serve both parties, but he just has a cuddlier face while doing it. And that's why he sort of flies under the radar, and he's not such a villain as Manchin and Sinema are for the public. But Dick Durbin's up in that club with them, the very elitist, cloistered, elite impunity, pretending to be doing things when you're really not, just shuffling the papers around and allowing Kremlin operatives in the Senate to block Biden's judges when we desperately need to confirm as many as we can over the next 2 years. We're only guaranteed 2 years, and there is a lot that Biden can do in that time, even with a shit show running the House with their super slim margin, but ruling as though they got a mandate from the American people, ignoring the fact that the American people went with pitchforks and torch. Well, no, they're the party of torches. But even though the American people like went to the polls saying, "Hell no, we're not going to become a fascist, fake Christian nationalist, Hungarian," what's that guy, Viktor Orban, Putinite, mass murdering, bringing back slavery, bringing back child endangerment laws, forcing kids to work in factories and so on. Like there's a law that's just out of Iowa where they're going to roll back protections for child labor. They're going to bring back the industrial revolution of kids being forced to work in factories. I'm not kidding. Like it's obscene what we're up against. It's really that like mustache twirling evil. And guys like Dick Durbin are part of the problem.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very glad you brought up the need for, lower district judges to try to combat the radical right-wing Supreme Court, whose judges were appointed by an illegitimate president under Trump, but, a president who should have been investigated for a multitude of crimes. If you're wondering what those crimes are, you can consult 5 years of Gaslit Nation episodes, and who carried with them their own disqualifying past actions like Brett Kavanaugh and his debt, another story which has been dropped and not investigated. And, I have to say, like one of the most shocking things, and I don't get shocked by that much anymore. I've been living in a state that has a trigger law, in Missouri, which means that the day that Roe was overturned, while I was out kayaking on a lake trying to get my frustration out, my attorney general signed away my right to my bodily autonomy. And that attorney general is now the senator of my state. And women here were devastated, and reproductive rights activists in particular were devastated, and were often forced underground, because the priority of these activists, of these doctors, of these women, and often men, who are trying to protect our rights to privacy, our rights to bodily autonomy, is to help people. It's to help people in a terrible time of need, in a very vulnerable position. And so there's not, in that case, people aren't going to go on Twitter and be like, guess what I did today? Like I violated state law and, helped a young girl who was raped get an abortion. Like this isn't for bragging rights. This isn't for, theater. Like these are people's real lives. And I live in one of these states, and I thought really that there would be more pushback from the Democratic Party on a national level. And instead what I found is that we, as people who live in the trigger states, we are demonized, or we're used as pawns in fundraiser emails. Give us some money and maybe we'll push to get back your bodily autonomy. And the overwhelming message from the Democrats is, you're asking for it. You all were asking for it. And I'll just say, I've heard that phrase a lot of times. And that's very much how it feels like. And to be clear, we're not. In all of these states that people like to typecast as, very conservative, as quote, bright red states, you're seeing people pushing back. We saw that in Kansas with their referendum. And when the opportunity for a referendum to make sure that reproductive rights stay protected presents itself, all of these states are voting, to protect them. Nobody likes the severity of the Roe versus Wade, overturn, especially when it's combined with stuff like Texas having bounty hunter initiatives and so forth. It's very frightening, but they're not really doing much, even rhetorically, to push back against it. They're not treating it as a public health crisis, which it is. And one of the things they can do is, as Andrea said, is appoint judges who, on a local level, will protect the rights of pregnant people. But we're seeing reluctance to do that. I believe in New York also, we're seeing this attempt to try to push forth anti-abortion judges. We saw it with Henry Cuellar in Texas when Pelosi and the other Vichy Democrats are trying to back him, even though he's against women having reproductive rights. It's a frightening thing because it makes you feel like, folks who are already very disadvantaged, facing incredible cruelty from these legislatures. Because, let me be clear, like they get off on this. They absolutely love this. These right-wing members of the Supreme Court, these right-wing extremists in legislatures like Missouri, it's about control. It's about the ability to abuse and corral women like cattle and deprive us of the rights to our own bodies and our own decisions. And that's, a frightening thing on a day-to-day level to live under. And you would think there'd be more solidarity, more protection, but no, we're asking for it, as I've heard. So two things there. We've got insurrectionists and seditionists in the House. We've got a radical right-wing Supreme Court, which has the ability often to overturn the more sensible decisions of state legislatures. And then a third example of Trump did not win, but the coup won, is that Trump is roaming free. Trump is running for president again to be Mafia Grover Cleveland. And, this is a situation that I think is unparalleled in history, at least in democratic countries. I can certainly think of a parallel in Germany in 1933, but I've never heard of a country in which a openly plotted violent coup was allowed to proceed, was barely fought against, and then through the effort of the electorate, of the voters, of the public, the coup failed, and then the administration that came in refused to investigate it, refused, thoroughly at least, refused to hold the elite operatives behind it accountable, instead focusing on low-level pawns, and then allows the head insurrectionist to run for president again, despite the fact that he openly believes that our elections are illegitimate unless he wins them, has threatened enormous number of Americans, enormous numbers of people in Congress, of private citizens. Like, This is very obviously a man who should be in prison, a man who should not be allowed to run for anything again. And it's frustrating to see the commentary about the situation because people still treat it to this day like a horse race game, like some sort of little popcorn chewing rah rah. Are they going to get him? And like Andre and I don't care. Like we want our country to be protected. We want to be protected ourselves from a national security threat, from a violent demagogue with a proven track record of exactly what he will do to people. Once he gets into executive power. And obviously, this should be treated as a profound crisis. And obviously, that profound crisis extends far beyond Trump, to the network, some of whose members I was just naming, who are also not investigated: Stone, Flynn, Manafort, and so on. And, the DOJ has turned their back on that. I have more examples sort of stretching out from there. But any comments on Trump, coup plotter Central being allowed to possibly return to the White House?
I know this sounds mad to say, but I would actually be relieved if it was Trump on the ballot in 2024. I mean, it'd make a absolute mockery of the criminal justice system in the US, but so does every police lynching of a young black man in America. But it would just underline all that. I think Trump would be significantly easier to beat than DeSantis, who is the prettier package and the better behaved fascist in the eyes of the independents that you need to win the Electoral College. Unfortunately, the reality is just not enough people vote, and Trump brings out the non-voters to vote against him. His whole MAGA movement turned Arizona blue on the big races. It won Nevada, significant races in Nevada, and we came again very close in Wisconsin for the Senate. Unfortunately, DeSantis, he fools people. The New Yorker gave him a profile that was supposed to sort of dig deep, but it ended up convincing folks. People were saying to me, well, DeSantis seems like a reasonable guy. He's got some good environmental records. DeSantis is very much a cookie cutter of Viktor Orban, who has turned Hungary into a authoritarian state light, like the Diet Coke of authoritarian states. You had this whole coalition that got together, put their differences aside to try to defeat Orban, and they couldn't do it because one was gerrymandering was so bad in Hungary, and also he's done a lot to really weaken the opposition, including spreading his propaganda on social media and state media and so on. And the anti-gay laws are straight up Orban, and Putin in Russia. Like that's how Putin consolidated his power when he was climbing, building a dictatorship for himself, was through anti-gay laws. And DeSantis is straight out of that playbook. And he's more of like where Trump comes in like a whirlwind of fascism. DeSantis is the frog in the pot of boiling water fascism, where it's just slowly, gradually heating up. And I'm concerned that his younger, fresher face and his Brooks Brothers, his Brooks Brother mystique is going to fool enough of these independent voters that you need to win the Electoral College in America, and that it'd be a very close matchup between Biden and DeSantis. And we know that the Koch brothers political network is desperate to shut out Trump. They're pledging a fortune to a Republican primary leader who's not Trump. So Trump really is the underdog, even though he is the spiritual force of today's Republican Party, and they built this monster. They built him. This is the Republicans' Frankenstein monster. All those years of racist dog whistles and misogyny and coming after Roe and all these things. The Obama birther movement, it was very much a Republican movement that Trump was the leader of. Trump is the Republican Party because they've been in bed with him for so long, and now they see that a whirlwind of fascism, Hitler, Orange Hitler just doesn't win the voters they need. And so they're going to try to pivot to a DeSantis because he's safer for them. And I'm sure the Kochs will get behind DeSantis. And I do worry about a Biden-DeSantis matchup. We're going to watch the State of the Union tonight. We're going to see what sort of energy comes out in this evening, what the promises are. And then we'll talk about it on this week's bonus episode for our Patreon subscribers, as well as answering some questions from our listeners. And we can talk about, is it looking like Biden's going to run again? Because that's the big question. The New York Times just did a bit of a hit piece. Whatever your criticism of her is, like I've been critical on this show of Kamala Harris, vice president, but the New York Times did go after her in a recent piece that came out saying that she's waffling, that even the people in her inner circle that Kamala's folks referred the New York Times to in order to get positive quotes for their profile on her and what she's been up to, they turned on her instead and expressed concern to the New York Times of whether Kamala Harris has what it takes to rise above. And again, the vice president role is historically awful. You're contained, you're in a box. And vice presidents very rarely have a legacy other than, of course, famously Dick Cheney, because he was the military industrial complex. He was Halliburton invading Iraq to make a bunch of money for himself and shareholders. Like that was just like a bald-faced money grab, right? And so that made him sort of the singular vice presidents. Vice presidents go. But typically not a fun role. And she took it on. I mean, she would have been fine in the Senate. She would have been great bringing her prosecutor skills to on Senate committees and grilling people and producing great TV. That's what she was doing before. And we're not really getting that because that's fine in that role. But being that sexy TV law and order prosecutor that gets played by Maya Rudolph on SNL, it's not the vice president role. It's it's like you're more like a backup dancer, and that's a really tough thing to be stuck in. Like Biden came in to be the white guy that vouched for Black Obama to become president. He was like the affable white guy with his big shiny teeth and love of ice cream who could put his arm around Obama and make Obama seem less threatening to the racists in the country and so on. Like it's all going to be okay, you know. And that was a very strategic choice, which produced a beautiful, authentic friendship between the two that was very clearly genuine. Biden did a lot of good things for Ukraine during his time as vice president. But Kamala, there are headlines of her coming out and doing things when it comes to, I don't know, some labor laws recently, like she was standing up for, but she hasn't really come out. I'll just say again, as vice president, we knew that Biden had a soft spot for Ukraine. That was obvious. He gave a lot of attention to Ukraine. He was assigned Ukraine as part of Obama's foreign policy portfolio. And he delivered on Ukraine in a lot of significant ways, including delivering a Gaslit Nation sermon in Ukraine's parliament, telling the Ukrainian government that the Kremlin was weaponizing their own corruption against them. And then the Kremlin, having success of that in Ukraine, then weaponized American corruption against us in the US through Trump and the rest of the Republican Party and so on. So Biden stood out as being a champion of human rights in Ukraine and fighting corruption in Ukraine and standing up to the Kremlin. Like he stood out for that. And you could tell that that was his soft spot, that he really genuinely cared. And it shows a lot as president. Like he's done miraculous things as president. He shut down Nord Stream 2, which I used to pull my hair out over on this show. Thank God, which Angela Merkel and the rest of the German establishment allowed Germany to become further entrenched on Russian gas. Biden shut that down. And he said he was going to, and he did. He united NATO. He united global democracies. He's fought tooth and nail to help Ukraine to confront an existential genocide against the country. It's an open genocide that Russia is waging against Ukraine. So we know that he had this passion for Ukraine, and it showed as vice president, and it shows now as president. I cannot tell you what that passion as a leader is for Kamala. She needs to just stop with the consultants. She needs to stop with the communication experts and just release her heart and just go after what she loves. I'll just go say this. When John Kerry was running for president and he earned the nickname flip-flopper, that was true. Like he really did have consultants on one cell phone and the other cell phone and both cell phones pressed to his ear. Kamala can't go down that path. She needs to just rip open her shirt and show the Supergirl uniform underneath and just come out swinging for whatever cause is deep to her heart. That she has 2 years to do that. Just be authentic now. But I do not think that America is ready for her in a matchup versus DeSantis at all. I do hope that it is Biden running in 2024. I really do. And I think the anger towards him that shows up in the polling, I really do believe that that's coming from general malaise in America, where we feel like, my God, the fascists are winning. The fascists are
Hmm.
relentless. Why won't somebody do something? And Biden being president, everyone looks to him. Like, why isn't Trump in jail? Why aren't more of these guys arrested? Why is Bannon running around cooing? Why is Manafort going around doing a rehabilitation book tour along with Jared Kushner and Ivanka? So that whole feeling of Gotham City being like ran over by like the Penguin and the Joker and so on, like it's like that's what we're responding to in Biden's poll numbers. And if he can just fix that and get the DOJ shaped up, I know there's a separation between him and America's top cop Garland, but he could also say as president that he wants greater accountability, that he wants this neo-Nazi warfare against our democracy, including neo-Nazis trying to blow up the power station in Baltimore, predominantly black city. If he could do more of a rallying call against the homegrown fascist threat in America and the Russian operations that pour gasoline on it, if he can just be a lot more visible in taking on those demons and forcing accountability, you'll see his polling numbers shoot up. And I do want to see him run again. I think he's been great for Ukraine. I think he'll win again, especially if he has a lot of the same team helping him as that he had in 2020 and the same like Bernie Sanders on the stump and Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. If he has the whole unity force out again and talks about accountability and in concrete ways of how he's going to give us accountability finally, I think he'll be fine, especially against DeSantis and all that Coke money.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I agree with you that Kamala Harris versus DeSantis would be a disaster. I also think DeSantis is somebody who, as the scrutiny grows, if there's debates and so forth, is going to crumble, I think, a little more than folks anticipate. I think people think he's like, the new Ronald Reagan, and I don't see that, in him when he speaks. But he is a threat. I mean, he's a threat within Florida, and that has become the template, for what the GOP wants to do nationally and is, going to be able to do nationally in a lot of ways, because when they're able to get a national board like, the advanced placement, courses to, get rid of their Black History course or to strike writers from it, that trickles into the national discourse. And that's just like one example of something that DeSantis and his backers have been able to pull off in Florida. I mean, it's like if we make it to 2024, I'll be kind of astounded, because with Trump and the rest of these people, running around and cooing and criming, like it is an active, ongoing, daily national security threat that transcends politics. It transcends our electoral system. It transcends these kind of, we can wait until the election type scenarios. We're in danger right now. But one other thing that does make me worry, though, assuming we get to 2024, assuming Biden does run again, is that I think, a lot of folks voted for Biden as a vote against Trump, a very strong vote against Trump. They also voted for the platform that Biden ran on, which included a lot of accountability, which included a lot of social welfare programs. It did not include the biggest military budget in history. It did not include a lot of the things that he's done. And this is where I get to another point in my list of how Trump lost the election but won the coup, is that we're seeing this in this quote unquote culture war that the GOP launched, and really amped up once they lost the actual election. And what they call a culture war is actually a sophisticated attack on human rights. And now they've gotten their cruelty codified in law. And this is, again, an opportunity, like you said, for Biden and Harris and others to at least rhetorically speak out against it. One thing that's absolutely wild to me is that when Biden did do this, when he made his big pro-democracy speech in the fall of 2022, it was debated in the media. Like, is it appropriate? Is it appropriate for the American president to vouch for democracy? Like, it's like, they need to, first of all, just ignore the media, like ignore that type of punditry, which is, really both sidesing democracy versus fascism. And I'm sorry, when you both sides democracy versus fascism, you are throwing fascism a win. Like, it's incredibly cut and dry. And they've been doing that on a more, localized level regarding specific topics, or, should I say specific rights. For years, we saw this with the escalated attack on trans Americans. We've seen this with a revival of homophobia that I've not seen the levels of this since the 1990s. It's like going back in time. We've seen it in the continued assault of, on Black Americans by police most of the time. The police are let free, and then this media culture that contributes to the threats instead of covering them, instead of speaking to the victims, instead of censoring the victims. And one thing that just continues to blow my mind, we've covered him on this show before, is Christopher Rufo, the GOP operative, will get on Twitter and he'll just announce, like, yeah, here's our new plan. We found this term, critical race theory. We're going to make every single debate about it. We're going to demonize it, but also, expound upon it so vaguely that the term will lose all meaning and will just serve as this, stand-in catchphrase for all the evil that the Democrats are doing. And, he comes out and says, like, this is our game plan. And then they follow the game plan. The media follows the game plan. And then meanwhile, you've got actual writers, activists, professors, teachers in public schools saying, hey, hey, we have a problem because this isn't just some sort of abstract debate. Like, we have the GOP actually putting forward incredibly repressive and bigoted laws through state legislatures, through local legislatures. Like, we could use a little help here. And then you've got people, starting in 2019, especially, just kind of laughing off that threat, saying that the real threat was quote unquote, wokeness, which I think they're using in lieu of another word. And it's only when things get to a level where you're seeing, incredible suppression, incredible personal attacks, things like kids in middle school and high school having to submit their, menstrual cycles and the dates of them to state governments. I mean, really over the top stuff. They're finding like, ooh, maybe we went too far on attacking the quote unquote wokeness. Maybe we should have taken all those other attacks a bit more seriously and not contributed to, the both sidesing of fascism. But the thing is like, it's too late in terms of a lot of the laws. I think a lot of these people are going to be sued for being unconstitutional, but it's not too late, at least rhetorically, to say what you stand for, to condemn Nazis. For some reason, it was very easy for people to do this during the Trump administration, like after Charlottesville, after all of these other horrific events, and they suddenly have become very timid. This correlates with a lot of changes we've seen in media, a lot of firing of journalists who aren't white, of women, of, the same thing happening in entertainment. It's the backlash. It's just an incredibly wide-ranging backlash to a lot of pretty major movements, including Me Too, including fights for Black rights, including fights for voting rights. If there was a culture war for a while, progressives, or at least Democrats, were winning it. And then they surrendered that war by pretending it wasn't happening or that it wasn't serious. It was just some sort of debate and not something that had to do with actual laws that affect actual human beings. And now that's the point that they're at. And I think DeSantis is the person who embodies that the most, because he's accomplished that in Florida. And as a result, people who live in that state are suffering enormously. So I've got other points, but do you have any response to that?
Yes, I agree. And DeSantis has an annoying voice. Like, I'm a
Yes.
big voice person. Like, I'm saying that while I'm on the brink of losing my voice right now from this cold. But his voice is so whiny. It's like he sounds like such a little bitch.
He looks like if Reagan, like if you compressed him like in some sort of machine and like shrank him down, like a deformed action figure or something. Of
He looks like some woke mob gave him a permanent wedgie. And he, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I kind of feel like I look at, who is most likely to be the new demagogue. Because it's not easy to be a demagogue. You can have all the help in the world and you still can't pull it off, like Trump.
Trying, and it's not taken off.
Yeah. Trump was a natural born demagogue. That was his utility to the GOP and to all of these illicit backers abroad and to the mafia. He's a showman. He's a front man. I don't think DeSantis is that kind of charisma. Initially, I was worried about like Tucker Carlson or somebody like that, somebody who more naturally inhabits the demagogue role going in there, but they seem to be placing their bets in DeSantis. I mean, you could just look at where the money's going. You can look at where, the big backers who elevated Trump and elevated others are throwing down their cash. And it's early, but so far it's DeSantis, which is alarming in its own right for what DeSantis, is doing to Florida and doing to our country right now. And it's also just crazy. I look at him, he and I are almost the exact same age, where he and I are like a week apart. And I think
He
about that
looks 10
sometimes.
years older
I
because
know.
he's rotting from the inside.
But I also think about, well, how old was he when certain pivotal events happened, like the LA riots, the OJ Simpson trial, the impeachment of Bill Clinton, 9/11? Like, we were the exact same age. And I keep thinking how he's hearkening back to so many of the things that we both grew up with. And it's just a retread, like the, woke debate now. It's the PC debate of the 1990s. Like, the radical Republicans now is the same movement that Newt Gingrich was working on, in the mid 1990s. Like, this is just one big continuum, one big nightmare that we were born into, and I wrote Hiding in Plain Sight about that. I started it with Trump's career in the 1970s, corresponding with the decline of the entire country, corresponding with like me and Ron DeSantis being born, apparently, during the Carter administration. And so, he's witnessed all this. And it's just sometimes wild to me that you can be the same age as somebody and witness all these events and come out with just utterly different views. But I think he has this preening ambition that I lack, which is why I'm doing a podcast from my bedroom with you. So
Thanks.
anyway, yes, exactly. No, it's a compliment. It's a compliment. All right. So other indicators that Trump lost, but the coup won. Major ones are that people who helped facilitate the coup are still in their positions in the federal government under Joe Biden. And this remains, one of the big mysteries of our time. We've done separate episodes on both of them. I think the DeJoy one was called The DeJoy of Crooking. Anyway, Louis DeJoy, still in charge of the post office after trying to annihilate mailboxes, prevent voting by mail. Like, he was supposed to be investigated by Congress for all these things, potentially by the DOJ for these things. Instead, he's there. And Biden, he did replace people at the Board of Governors and the Postal Service, but he replaced them with Louis DeJoy fans. So Louis DeJoy remains in that position of power, which of course is dangerous for an election. Even worse, you have Christopher Wray staying in as the head of the FBI. He was Trump's pick. Of course, the suggested pick for Trump from Mitch McConnell was Merrick Garland, who Biden then made Attorney General. Trump rejected the Merrick Garland bid and chose Wray instead. Wray looked the other way when an attempted coup and violent attack on the Capitol happened. Still has not arrested the major operatives behind that attack, and had a Kremlin asset or possibly agent working right under his nose, Charlie McGonigal, who we've covered in previous shows. And, you don't hear any talk from the Biden folks about yeah, maybe we should get rid of this guy. Maybe this is not who we want here. Maybe he actually should be investigated. Maybe the FBI is a broken, evil institution. But no. And, I bring these up because, there are a lot of things going wrong in America that are not in Joe Biden's control. Like, he can't do much about them. Like, inflation was one. And, I might get into COVID later. There are things he can do about it. But, there are some things that just happen and they're not caused by the president and they can't be unilaterally fixed by it. He can get rid of Christopher Wray. He can get rid of Louis DeJoy. And he's just choosing not to. He could also get rid of Merrick Garland, although God only knows who he'd replace him with, and has chosen not to. And that's a very frightening thing, because to me it says, I approve of this coup. I don't see any other logic behind this, because it is incredibly dangerous for our country. It's dangerous for him personally, one would think. So it's kind of bizarre in the sense of self-interest. Anyway, I've gone over this before. There's no precedent for this internationally. We've seen in recent months in Brazil, in Germany, people attempting coups. And the normal thing happens when someone attempts a coup, which is the coup plotters are arrested, indicted, investigated, not allowed to serve in Congress, and so forth. I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it's just, it's so bleak. Along the same lines, Kevin McCarthy, a leading insurrectionist, is now the Speaker of the House as a result of the GOP winning. And we've gone through in previous episodes how shady that election was, particularly the action in George Santos's state of New York. And McCarthy is troubling not just for his seditious impulses and right-wing hardline views, but because of his connections to a variety of oligarchs. He has taken an enormous amount of money from Russian oligarch proxies like Len Blavatnik, who can legally give money as a U.S. citizen and can, therefore further the interests of people like Oleg Deripaska or Viktor Vekselberg. We also have McCarthy's own history, where he allegedly admitted that he knew about Trump's illicit ties to the Kremlin and to the Russian mafia all along. And that was reported way back in 2017. And you think, yeah, maybe there'd be some follow up on that. But no, this is yet another thing that the DOJ could have investigated, but they were too busy working for the Russian mafia themselves. The House GOP is too busy planning show trials and also deleting evidence of prior investigations from the internet. If you want to go see what the Democratic House is up to in the brief period that they were actually investigating all of these corrupt people, this is from about 2017 to 2019, before Pelosi became the Speaker of the House. There are quite a lot of investigations from the Oversight Committee and other committees, in particular, Elijah Cummings investigations, the late Elijah Cummings, of things like illicit Saudi money going to members of the Trump crime family. Those are being deleted by the Republicans, I assume. Those are being deleted from the archives that are available to the public online. So we're watching history be erased and we're watching history be rewritten, all of which is a crisis, particularly in an era where we already are contending with social media monopolies dominated by people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and whatnot. We're losing access, to primary sources and to real-time evidence of what truly happened. And that you'd think folks would want to preserve that, because if you can't have an accurate rendering of history, it's very hard to fight for the future. It's a truly threatening and damaging sequence of events. Any thoughts?
Ooh. Sorry.
Wray, DeJoy, McCarthy.
No, I mean, it's such a punch in the gut to see McCarthy as Speaker of the House. He did some video where he was saying the House is going to stand firm. Republicans are going to be united against China, China buying up all our farmland, which I agree is troubling. Why the hell are we letting an authoritarian state buy up so much farmland, you guys, when sustainable farming, sustainable feeding an overpopulated country is a very big issue right now that's going to reach a crisis point. So please do not let an authoritarian regime buy up all our food, especially one that doesn't like us, doesn't like democracy, and is carrying out a genocide against a religious minority, the Uyghurs. So yeah, that's not a good policy. But they use China as just another Republican racist dog whistle. They don't really care about that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have had Trump and Ivanka as being the heart and soul of the Republican Party, where Ivanka having her daughter speak Mandarin on Instagram or whatever to try to win hearts in China. And Ivanka getting all those, jumping the line and getting all those Chinese patents, Trump having a bank account in China, and on it goes. Like, Trump basically did WWF style wrestling theatrics. As you pointed out, he's a grand showman, and that's what an aspiring dictator needs, and DeSantis doesn't have that. But this whole sort of Kevin McCarthy, GOP being the tough guys on China is just gaslighting. They would be right in China's pocket alongside Trump if they could. And I'm sure many of them probably are.
Oh, yeah. In Missouri, a lot of them are. And then they do the same thing where, they rightfully, will condemn the mass purchasing of Missouri farmland, by the Chinese government or by proxies for the Chinese government. I mean, this is one of these issues where, I think most Americans agree about this. We also agree about things like Saudi Arabia owning a lot of our water supply in the Southwest. Like, these are threats to our sovereignty. And I don't think it matters what political party you're in. We should all be alarmed by that, but we also should be alarmed by the hypocrisy and the inaction, especially in an era of climate change, especially when resources like food and water are going to become increasingly scarce, and we need those resources for the people actually living here. And again, this is about the Chinese government. This is not about Chinese people. It's obviously not about Chinese American people who are in the same situation as we are, because we are one country. And yeah, it is shameful. And so I have two more points to make on this. Trump won the coup. The next one is about the January 6th committee, which was, in my view, basically a wash. It was not as bad as the DOJ's inaction, but I do think it failed to inform the public about the background and extent of the attacks, much like the impeachment hearings failed to, much like the canceled oversight hearings failed to. It was an ineffective exercise in selective narrative dissemination. Among the things that everyone is still wondering about are, who was that bomber outside who potentially could have killed Kamala Harris? You'd think that would be a bigger issue, especially given the photo evidence. But again, as I said, our FBI is too busy working for the Russian mafia, who removed the panic buttons in Ayanna Pressley's office, who made other, public threats of violence against other members of Congress. You can see a lot of these plans for this operation being released online. We saw, Lynn Wood, a colleague of Flynn and Stone, laying them out there. It's not a lot of mystery. We also have connections within the government. Michael Flynn's brother, Charles, allegedly aided in this attempted coup, and he's still there too. He's still there in the U.S. military. And, I've said this so many times, but apparently I need to say it again so that someone else besides our show will cover it. The January 6th committee was overseen by Jamie Garelick, mistress of disaster, the modern Roy Cohn. She also is part of the 9/11 committee, which is another exercise in selective narrative dissemination that buried a lot of important information, like Saudi complicity, from the American public. She oversaw that committee. She's also, as I've mentioned many times, Merrick Garland's lifelong best friend and mentor, and is probably exerting some influence over the DOJ. But we don't really hear that. We just see her pop up in every propaganda piece about Merrick Garland. I guarantee you will find this name along with lies like Merrick Garland solved the Oklahoma City bombing. And so the reason I bring this up in this context is because the January 6th committee and all of its open hearings were a fantastic opportunity for Trump to firmly lose the coup by having the stakes spelled out to Americans and by having the entire decades-long context of how Trump even got into a position to do what he did spelled out to the American public. And I actually think a lot of voters who are not Democrats, who maybe even hate the Democrats, would have been very interested to learn more about the role of FBI complicity over the decades, DOJ complicity, institutional failure. I know this because I write books about these things. And, every now and again, I get emails that are like, I disagree with like pretty much everything else you say, but this was new information for me. Things like, Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, or the fact that two heads of the FBI went on to work for the Russian mafia. These are important, salient facts that I think most Americans don't know, because most media outlets just kind of ban people from saying them on the air. They seek out former employees of the DOJ or the FBI. We're not going to bring this up, even though this is very public information. Like, you can get this from print news articles, Wikipedia, historical archives, what have you. Like, there's nothing in doubt about anything I'm saying right now. But they just don't want that to be the point, because they need to try to pretend that institutions aren't complicit and or negligent in this disaster. And so, that I don't fully understand what happened with the January 6th committee. I would love an expose about what actually did happen. I suspect the presence of Liz Cheney, which everybody was vouching for at the time as this wonderful thing, did great damage because, of course, a Cheney family member is not going to want to have a historical look at institutional complicity and malice over the last few decades, which would, lead directly to her
Because we
father.
have questions about Iraq and how much money he made off that war.
We have questions about everything, and it's good to have questions about everything. I mean, that used to be thought of as an admirable quality of civic virtue, is to question our authorities, to want investigation, to want transparency. And now, now we are demonic troublemakers. But, Liz Cheney's not going to put her father's life or reputation in jeopardy, which is why she's a very convenient person to have on that committee. And one of the people who she did not want the committee looking at was Roger Stone. Why is that? Because Roger Stone was heavily involved in the 2006 election, in particular, the contrived Brooks Brothers riots in favor of getting George Bush into the White House and therefore getting Dick Cheney into the White House. You can't tell the story of the rise of Donald Trump and leave all of this out. You can't pretend he just came out from nowhere and was some kind of anomaly. He was a product of this relationship, between the GOP and intelligence agencies and a corrupt FBI and all of these, outside actors, a lot of whom can be dated back to Iran-Contra. It's very seedy and awful and frightening, to be honest, but they don't want to talk about it. The thing is, though, is you can't solve it unless you talk about it. You can't discuss it. You can't come up with solutions unless you know the extent of the problem. And I actually do have faith in the American people to come up with answers about what to do about this, sensible answers other than executing all of Congress. Because I think that a lot of times we're much more on the same page than, the media and politicians want us to believe. This is a disillusioned country. We're sick of corruption. We're sick of kleptocracy. We're sick of elite criminal impunity. We're traumatized. Whatever your feelings are about the pandemic, we've all been suffering underneath it. And it takes a toll. And I think watching people get away with horrific crimes and then try to frame that back to us as red states and blue states and Democrats versus Republicans, where it's obvious there's, a unity in the level of this corruption and its plutocracy, its oligarchy, is demoralizing because it leaves us feeling like, well, this is so powerful. What can we do? And, we've gone over and over and again, things that you can do locally or in your own life. We have an action guide on our website, on gaslitnationpod.com. But I think, one of the most important things you can do is always tell the truth, no matter how painful or horrifying it is, and always dig deep and follow the money and center the victims of this crisis, which means centering yourself. We Americans, we the people, we are the victims of this crisis, and we have been betrayed. And we do not deserve it. Yes, we got Trump out of office, but the coup won. And now it is time for the coup to lose.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher.
We encourage you to donate to help rescue and recovery efforts in Turkey and Syria following the devastating earthquakes in early February. To help people in Turkey, visit the TPF Türkiye Earthquake Relief Fund at tpfund.org.
To help Syrians in need, donate to the White Helmets at whitehelmets.org. We also encourage you to help support Ukraine by donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. In addition, we encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org and avoid products with palm oil. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going.
Our production manager is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Garland. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Garland.
Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Garland.
Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish.
Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Footsie Tootsies,
Chick Quinn,
Lily Wachowski,
Sean Rubin,
Todd S. Pearlstein,
Kenny Main,
John Schoenthaler,
Ellen McGirt,
Joel Farron,
Larry Gasson,
Erica Moore,
Karen A. Deal,
Nico Phillips,
Brian E. Castor,
Tatjana Birch,
Karen Heisler,
Ann Bertino,
Chris Bravo,
Stephanie Brandt, MD,
John Millett,
David East,
Ida,
Ben Wheaton,
Joseph Mara Jr.,
Julie Matthews,
Meganopolis,
Mark Merck,
Barbara Kittredge,
Matthew Womack,
Silas Frank,
Sean Berg,
Kristen Custer,
Tracy Ash,
Kai Gillis,
William Barry Reeves,
Sharon Hattrick,
Richard Smith,
Emmy,
Kevin Gannon,
Mike Christensen,
Sandra Collins,
Katie Masuris,
John Laughlin,
Emily Fenning,
James D. Leonard.
Leo Chalupa,
He's back. Couldn't stay away. Carol Golstad,
Jason Benke,
Marcus J. Trent,
Joe Darcy,
Ann Marshall,
Jeremy Lewis,
Joel Newman,
Trigve,
D.L. Singfield,
Matt Perez,
Nicole Spear,
Brian Tajuden,
Abby Road,
Jens Eilstrup Rasmussen,
Z.W.,
Kathy Kavanaugh,
Sarah Gray,
Diana Gallagher,
Jennifer Ann Luter,
John Ripley,
Ethan Mann,
Leah Campbell,
Lynn Schneider,
Jared Lombardo.
Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
Thank you.